people can only be confident in a ministry if they're confident in a leader, and they can only be confident in a leader if that leader is actually genuinely confident in themselves.
Hey everyone, welcome back to season 2 of the Church Circle podcast. We've had some great guests so far. Some have been in the East Coast of America, West Coast. Some have been here in the UK, and there's another person who's actually from South Africa today, but I know him personally as a friend. We met a couple of years ago when he moved over here, and we got chatting the other day, and I was like, this is the perfect person to talk about this specific topic. So before I get into the topic, I'd love for you to all meet Adi Reed, who's here with me in the UK, but originally from South Africa. Adi, firstly, thanks for joining us on the show. Why don't you just kind of fill us in bit about who you are and why you've chosen to leave sunny South Africa and come to the UK.
Mate, I don't know if I could answer the second part of the question because I'm still wrestling with why I made that decision. But my name is Adi, short for Adi, long for Adrian. But only my wife can call me that when she's annoyed with me. And I'm here in the UK in Norfolk, and it's been a wild ride. But basically, this journey started for me and Mims with a God dream. We were actually really happy just living life, doing our thing, doing ministry, and just felt like God was stirring our heart towards Soul Church, which is the church that we're a part of. And it's been amazing how God's met us in that, provided for us, given us all we need, and kind of been an amazing opportunity to learn and grow and develop even more as a leader. And so it's been incredible.
I think it's funny, or it's always a good sign of our church have been talking about these new leaders that are coming, and have you met Adi and Mims before? And it was your sort of reputation had preceded you guys before you got here. So I was getting ready to meet someone, but also when you get given an expectation about someone and it ends up being much higher than the person actually is. You guys are the complete opposite of that. When we first met you, you were just so welcoming and kind, and we just wanted to get to know you guys more, and then just see you in leadership and see how you and Mims have progressed in the church has been really cool. And you're just, again, full of integrity and great people to know and be around and inspiring as leaders. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to have you in this conversation today is because quite often we get people that are 40, 50 years old that have gone through a season of ministry, but you've actually been through quite a few seasons of ministry in your young age. So maybe just kind of fill us in about your backstory as to kind of why, and again, we'll get into the topic in a second, but kind of why you've been involved in so many ministries and what you've done.
Yeah, so no, I haven't been fired from different ministries, but actually I started out in youth ministry, as I think a lot of people do start out in youth ministry, either as a youth leader or like a trainee or a youth pastor. But I started out as a youth pastor and did a good season in youth and learned a lot there, and it was amazing. But a few years back, I started kind of getting thrown into the mix of different areas, campuses and different ministries in church. And I think what the first kind of place that I got thrown out of my comfort zone was actually our church internship back home in Cape Town. And I was commissioned with a little bit of a commission of, hey, this thing just needs a little bit of life, needs a little bit of health. It's struggling at the moment. Do you think you can give it a crack? And that's what I ended up doing. And it seemed to go pretty well. And so I think over the past couple of years, I've found myself in a new season and almost like a new sweet spot. Sometimes you're in a sweet spot and then God almost gives you a new sweet spot. And I found myself in a new sweet spot of really just being passionate about helping sick things become healthy, sick ministries, broken ministries, ministries that have just lost their way a little bit. I'm really passionate about jumping into these different areas in church and doing what I can do as best as I can do to bring some health into that area and life back into that area. And so I've been kind of thrown into the mix of everything over the years: internships, campuses, young adults ministry. My most recent one that I've been involved in is our kids ministry at Soul Church. And that's been thriving at the moment. It's been amazing. But man, that's been a whole new learning curve for me. Kids ministry is just a completely different thing. And so as much as I've loved getting to get my hands on different ministries and help coach leaders and help bring some ideas and perspective, it's also been amazing how I've been shaped in my leadership as I've been exposed to all these areas. So that's a little bit of my story.
Yeah, that's good. The conveyor belt, I feel like, the traditional conveyor belt is you start serving as a volunteer, whether it's in youth or kids. You progress to a leader in one of those areas. You progress to a pastor in one of those areas. Then you slowly begin to kind of expand more into whether it's care, pastoral, more the wider church. And then eventually you go to become an associate pastor and senior pastor. So there's always this there's this production line, but you've kind of gone around that in different ways, and you're finding yourself in different areas. And I think this is a really important conversation today, because we're going to be talking about fixing broken ministries. And I think broken is probably not exactly the right word, but struggling, or ministries that just need, like you said, like a little bit of extra life, a little bit of encouragement and pushing forward. And I think every church that's probably listening to this right now has a ministry that is struggling of some kind. Maybe they don't, maybe they've got it all together. That's great. But there are times where either it's under-resourced, whether it's financially, time, whether there's not enough leaders, maybe the leader needs help and input and some guidance. Maybe it's a young leader that's taken something on that's kind of bigger than they expected. It's all these different reasons why ministries struggle. And obviously, just kind of as you've said, there's lots of things that you've experienced in your short years in ministry. Or you said 10 years, right? It's been 10 years for you now in ministry.
It's a decade in January. So it's wild. I feel younger than I am.
So I say short years, but it's a third of your life basically of having to deal with this. So I'm really curious as to what you have to say. I've seen your work firsthand, and it's been really impressive. But maybe we can kind of dive into some of this. I hope that this is an encouragement to people listening, because I'm sure there are areas where they're like, actually, I'm struggling here, and I could really use some wisdom. So let's just dive straight in. I've got some questions here for you, and here's the first one. What are some red flags that might tell us a ministry is struggling or in just need of a shake-up?
Yeah, flip. I mean, I feel like there's some obvious answers to this. The two most obvious ones that I mean I can think of is firstly, if you're just not achieving what you should be achieving, that's an obvious red flag. And that's normally when people start to get worried or start to talk a bit about a ministry, like, is everything okay there? I just wanted to highlight this obvious one just because I think sometimes it's underplayed. But I think if your lead pastor or your pastor is saying, or even just your executive team is saying there's something wrong here and something's not healthy, I think that's a red flag we should listen to. And I think as young people, sometimes we underplay this red flag a lot. And I think after COVID, there was a bit of maybe a shake up in the psychology of young people where we don't trust leadership or authority anymore. But I would almost want to challenge anybody who's listening to this, like, make sure that before you look at any other red flags, that you've checked where your pastor's at with something. Like, if your pastor feels like something's amiss in a ministry, that's a very good red flag to be taking note of. And I think sometimes we can dismiss them and go, they don't really know what it's like. They may be not on the ground with the youth ministry or the whatever it is. But I think our pastors are actually very often really experts in ministry, and we don't lean on them enough. And so I just wanted to give some credit to the lead pastors out there. We've got to listen to them. But I would say one of the red flags that is maybe underrated the most is actually a lethargic, disengaged, discouraged, or not motivated team. I think when you look at a team, call it a kids team or a youth team, or even like a creative staff, maybe looking after the comms department in a church, or the production department, or creative tech, whatever you call it, and for you're noticing in your team or your staff, there's just a sense of lack of vision, or, there's no more creativity, there's no more drive. People just kind of do the bare minimum, rock up and do their thing. That's, to me, one of the biggest major red flags that something's struggling. And I think the challenge with that red flag is people often try to just chalk that down to, oh, they just don't get the culture of our church yet. And I think sometimes that's true. But I often find that in a ministry that's struggling, if your team and your leaders are not energized, they're not coming with ideas, there's no collaboration, there's no above and beyond kind of spirit of like, yeah, I'll stay an extra hour afterwards to like help do this thing or chat to that kid or pray for that person. If there's none of that, then I think that's a serious red flag we should look at. And I think the mistake would be to chalk that down to just culture. I think culture is great, but I think there could be some deeper things at play there.
Yeah, it reminds you of the kind of the ceiling of, there's going to be if you see a leader or a team that is unmotivated, or their output's not great, or you see some of those problems that you're talking about, there tends to be a ceiling. What has put that ceiling in place? Is that discouragement? Is that lack of motivation? Is that lack of faith? Is that no resources? And you start to see those ceilings and you go, okay, now I see there's a problem in going upwards, so we have to go down to find out what the problem is, right? And so that kind of leads me into the next question of, like, when you spot these problems, when you see these outworks, how do you actually get to the root issue of those issues?
Yeah, I think it's an important thing. I like what you said there about getting to the root, because the reality is that a good leader will look at the fruit of something, and they'll, in hindsight, maybe look back at a Friday night, or maybe look back at a past few nights of youth, or maybe look back at the past few months of productivity within the creative department, or look back at the past few weeks in church, and they'd go, there's something wrong, right? And they'd see the fruit. But I think a great leader and a great experienced leader can often dig down into the roots. And I think it's so important for us to never chalk things out just to, oh, well, the attendance has been low, maybe we just need to stick a few more invites in post boxes, but actually to go into the root of what's going on. And I think the best way to do that is just to firstly come with a humble heart. I think it's hard to admit that something's wrong. If you're leading a ministry or an area in church or department, sometimes it's really hard to just acknowledge that something's not going right over here. There's things that are misaligned or whatever it is. So I think just humbling yourself and going like, okay, things aren't right. And then having the humility to go and ask a bunch of questions. I think one of the best things you can do when you're trying to kind of diagnose a problem is throw a wide net and make sure you're just asking tons and tons of questions to lots of different people. I think it's easy to go maybe just to your lead pastor and go, what do you think? And that'll be very helpful. Or maybe just to your manager, or maybe just to your team. But I think, sometimes there's so much gold and value in our church. Sometimes in my time in youth, things weren't really adding up, or there wasn't an alignment in where we were going. And sometimes the best person to ask was the parents. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the best thing to do is just walk around church in the foyer and just say, I'm trying to bring a bit of health back into this area or this department. Have you noticed anything? Do you have any thoughts? And you'll find that as you put that wide net out, most people will collectively kind of say the same thing without saying it. And you'll get a little bit of like a scatter chart with all these different opinions, and you'll be able to find the 1, 2, 3 things that are actually collectively everybody's saying. And so I think just having the humility to ask questions and not falling into the trap of thinking you need to be the expert and figure it out on your own.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. The humility part is huge. I feel like, I don't know who set this kind of culture or this standard, but it feels like in ministry we're playing a game of snakes and ladders, but we only expect there to be ladders. And every time we move forward, it's got to be moved forward. It's got to be moved forward. We can't admit that we have to step back and rethink things and, take a few backward steps before we can move forward again. And I think every time we have to introduce humility and say, actually, I think there is a problem here, it does require step backs. Anytime you stretch yourself as a leader and you want to replicate yourself, you have to step back and you have to make some space in order to raise someone else up. And it's those kind of things where you have to go, I need to take some steps back. Some things are going to have to get dropped or moved or changed in order for us to move forward again. And I think there's this pressure on church leaders and on church creatives, on church staff, whoever it is. You've got to constantly move forward and constantly move forward. And I think that produces unhealth. It produces these issues. We're talking about burnout, stress, lack of motivation, because everyone's just trying to move forward as quickly as possible. And it's sometimes we do have to take those steps back. So in your experience, can you kind of share a time that you have come into a ministry, whether it's just to join as a pastor or to join in some kind of oversight, and you've seen these problems and you've switched it around, and what differences have you seen in that ministry afterwards as well?
Yeah, I think what you just said is true, and I've experienced that many times in ministry, and I would call it like getting stuck in the mud. I think so many times we can get stuck in the mud of we just need to move this thing forward. And and we actually forget about the fact that we need a team to help us move it forward. We need vision. We need, and I think what you said is so true, that if we're not careful, the spirit of moving forward, which is really good, like advance the kingdom of God, build the church, that's great. But the spirit of moving forward can actually get us focused on moving forward and not what are we actually moving towards. Sometimes we can be moving forward towards the wrong stuff or moving forward towards everything, and that just confuses us. And I think, to give an example of that, what had happened is, I think the people before basically had tried to rebrand this internship, and I think they had lost sight of where they were going with it. And the challenge was that, any church internship, I think there's so many memes around church internships. Like, my interns
we get to do this.
saying to me, yes, we get to do this. My interns send me memes about church internships, and I'm like, do you know that you're a church intern? Like, you're just roasting yourself. It's brilliant. But church internship, for example, is memed because it's hard work. And I think what had happened in this case was that they thought, maybe if we eliminate the hard work and we make it more like fun and you get a lot out of it, then that'll make it better. And what it actually did is it made it worse, because there was no challenge. Like, there was just no toughness to it. And what challenge and toughness does is it creates camaraderie, and it creates this thing of like, it sucks if we're the only ones stacking chairs, but at least we're stacking the chairs together. And at least, like, my leader did that 5 years ago, and I saw them do it when I was in youth. And that's kind of the season that I'm in, but I'm in this tough season together with my mates. And I think they kind of eliminated that from a good heart. But I think the problem, or the mistake that was made, is that they didn't ask themselves, where are we going and what are we trying to produce? I think they basically tried to make the best program they could. And on paper, it seemed good, but it wasn't actually achieving anything. And when I first came in, the question was like, what are we actually doing here? And no one could figure it out. And so I sat with some of our team, and I think the game changer, and I think if you're listening to this and you're stuck and you're going, I don't know what to do, my youth ministry is struggling, or I don't know what to do, the department in my church is struggling, I would just encourage you to ask one simple question. What are we actually doing here? What are we actually achieving? What's the goal of this thing? What direction are we going in? Because what happens in ministry so often, and I, even recently, just the past few months, have fallen into this trap, because sometimes it's easier said than done, is we can kind of be driving our ministry forward, and it's like driving a car 100 miles an hour down the highway, and we can be driving this thing forward. And who knows that when you're driving a car, you can look down at your phone and you can check an urgent message, maybe your wife or your husband or whoever's message you, and it seems urgent, and you look down. If you look down too long, that car is ending up in the bushes. And that's the reality with ministry. Sometimes when you look down at what's urgent and not what's important, your ministry can end up in the bushes. And so I don't know if there are broken ministries. I think sometimes it's just ministries that have gone the wrong direction and have been misdirected. I really don't believe that a ministry is too far gone. I think sometimes it's just maybe rolling it back over, sending it down on a little pickup truck and getting it back onto the highway, putting some fuel in it and sending it on its way. It's not broken. It's just gone off track. And I think that can be the case. And so I would encourage you, ask yourself, what are you doing? In the case of this internship, we had to ask ourselves right in the beginning, what is the actual point of this thing? And we got together some of the staff members and people that were part of church. And I just kind of posed that question, and collectively, we decided that we want to form identity and character in young adults, and we want that identity and character to be able to sustain their God-breathed futures. And the idea is that this year is not about God giving you your future and giving you like your grand plan, because that doesn't always happen that way. But what this year is about is forming your identity and building your character. And what does that mean? Sometimes you're going to stack chairs, and sometimes we're going to do a leadership thing, investment thing with you, and that's going to help you build your character. And there's going to be fun moments, and there's going to be awesome moments. There's going to be moments where you feel invested into and loved, but sometimes you're going to do a rubbish job because that's really good for you. And I think knowing that and being confident in that and being able to go in that direction, that gave us the confidence and the foundation in which we could be creative with the program. Because I think everybody, when they want to maybe make suggestions, because if you've ever been part of something that's not working or has been misdirected, people come in with lots of ideas and suggestions, and they think that a rebrand will fix it, or if we just did this course, or if we just did that, or if we, all these little tweaks, that's going to fix it. But sometimes you don't need a tweak. You just need the foundation to be correct. And all those tweaks and creativity is beautiful, but you can just build off the right foundation.
Let's be honest, managing the resources of a church is no walk in the park. But what if you could have stunning designs without breaking the bank? Or a team to craft your newsletters and create and schedule all your social posts? Enter Church Media Squad. They're here to help you save time and look incredible, so you can pour more energy into your congregation and less into your laptop. And get this, they save each of their partner churches an average of 15 weeks of work every single year. That's a game changer. Ready to learn more? Head to churchmediasquad.com and discover how they can help your church today. The mission is everything. Getting back to the mission of one, the ministry, but also the church, it fixes so many things. I kind of think of it like, people go about the carnivore diet, about like stripping back all of what you eat to the very bare essentials, and that will fix a lot of health issues, because sometimes you've got all the things on the perimeter, like you said, like you take your eyes off for one moment and then you're in the wrong direction. And I think it's kind of the same. Like if we can just focus on that mission and keep ourselves aligned to the very core beliefs and the core mission, everything kind of comes out of that, and that points us in the right direction. Now, that's great as a leader and as people who are running the team. But let's say you join a stagnant ministry, a youth ministry, a kids ministry, volunteer team, whatever it is. You've now got to bring the people that are in that ministry that were part of the stagnation. You've got to bring them with you on where you see it going. So how do you, or what tricks have you learned to get people behind you on that journey?
Yeah, that's the real tough challenge for sure. That's the tough challenge. And I think that one requires patience, because it's all good for us to be on the right starting blocks and have the right foundation. But anyone who's built anything knows that you can have all the resource, you can have all the vision, you can have all the taglines, but without a team, you can't go anywhere. And you need a team to get going and to revive this thing. And so I think the first thing to note for people is actually, you need people. You can't do it on your own. You can't just sit by yourself and come up with a new vision and go, this is the vision. Like, who's going to run that race with you? Who's going to go that direction with you? I think so often leaders make the mistake, especially young leaders, even like myself, we can make the mistake of going for it, being full of vision, but not valuing the diversity of a team and what they bring in that collaboration. So it can be really challenging to get people on board, to be honest. I think sometimes it takes forever. Sometimes it takes a lot of patience, take a couple of months. But tips and tricks that I've found along the way. I don't know if you've ever heard, or I'm sure many people have read lots of leadership books, but you get rights-based leadership and you get relationship-based leadership. And I would just encourage anybody listening that there is nothing better than a relational leader. Craig Rochelle always says this. He says, people would rather follow someone who's real or always real than someone who is always right. And I think for me, that's been such a good reminder in my leadership, is just to keep it real with people and do life with people. When I'm kind of either just coaching a young leader, speaking to various young people over the phone, young youth pastors or whoever it is who's struggling, one of the first bits of advice I always give to them is don't strangle your team. Sometimes we're so full of vision and energy and excitement that we strangle our team with like training nights and vision and values and all these amazing things that we read in books and listen to podcasts. All those things are good, but you have to be patient with those things and relational with those things. I would actually argue, and this might be an opinion that people might not agree with, but I would argue if you put 80% of your time into relationship building and 20% of your time into just giving them some vision, some culture, some things like that, you'll actually reap a lot more fruit than you would if you spent 80% of your time investing into people in terms of culture and training and all of those things. And so what does that look like? Even as simple as a coffee catch up with a key team member. Just ask the dude, how are you doing? Are you okay? Can I pray for you? Can I help you? You're looking for a new job? Maybe I can call someone and help you out with that. And you'll bear a lot more fruit just building relationally than you will trying to strangle this thing and trying to get this thing back to health by using vision. And so I would just encourage you, if maybe you are leading, let's say, for example, a youth ministry or whatever, an area in church that's struggling, those leaders that have been serving in your team are probably struggling also, and they're probably burnt out also, and they're probably tired also. And what they don't need is like another hoorah, let's do this. What they probably just need is a, how are you, bro? How are you? Can I pray with you? Let's hang out. Let's have a laugh together. Let's have a barbecue at my house. And you'll find a lot more fruit from that, because people buy into vision, but they're loyal to leaders. And I think you'll go a lot further if you've got a vision, you've got some loyalty. I think you can go real far with that.
That's great. These are great thoughts. I feel like there's a lot of cynicism, especially in this day and age. Everyone's skeptical about something. And the moment that someone has, especially in I think this might be a UK specific thing, or, kind of this side of Europe, is that people are very skeptical about any kind of change. They like what they have, they like tradition. And if anything comes against that, they're immediately got their back up. When we go into those scenarios, we have to be mindful that's probably going to be the attitude that people are going to have going into a ministry. There'll be some there that are really excited about change because they can see the problems. But sometimes some of the people are the problem, and you've got to work that out with them. It's not necessarily always the leader or the structure of the ministry. Sometimes it is just the people in it that need help and encouragement. And so how do you balance those two things of pushing things forward? But, there's a lot of times someone will join a ministry because they align with the vision. Let's say for kids, they really want to see young people on fire for Jesus, and they want to, train them in the way they should go. So they've got sort of stuck to that message and that alignment of that core value. And you're introducing these new changes, and maybe they might feel like that's being taking them away from that, even though it's not. So how do you balance the two things of moving forward, but also not kind of while retaining that core message that people signed up for? Does that make sense?
Totally. And I think it's a real question, and it happens all the time. Sometimes there are people who are genuinely difficult and challenging to get on board. And the reality is, some people are there for the right reasons, and they love young people, for example. And some people just maybe liked the idea of being a youth leader, or liked this or that leader before you, whatever it is. And that's okay. I think I would just firstly want to say, if there are people that can't get behind a new vision, I would just encourage people to pick their battles. Sometimes that leader, as awesome as they are, is not going to love the new direction, and they're not going to love you as a leader. And that's so fine. And I love affirmation. I thrive off affirmation. And that's been one of my hardest journeys as a leader, is just being okay if people don't like it. But I do think the other side of that is that sometimes we overthink it, and we overcook it, and we worry too much. I find, and I've found in different ministries, that kind of your people on the ground, your youth leaders, kids leaders, photography team, whatever random team, those guys on the ground are actually pretty happy to go with whatever direction the leader has set out, especially if things are not super healthy at the minute. If things are kind of, they're pretty happy to go with whatever change, because those guys just want to be part of an awesome team. They want to be part of something that's winning and thriving. They don't really want to stick to things that maybe aren't doing that well, right? I think that sometimes our biggest challenge can be our core teams, people that are really part of things, high capacity volunteer or staff, and then also the kind of teams or leaders above us. So whatever manager or leader that's above us, sometimes it's harder to actually get those guys on board. And the reason is because they're actually experienced. And experience tells you, this young guy has a lot of passion, but has he thought this through? And I think when it comes to the guys on the floor, it's I think any leader would know how to get them on board. It's relation, it's being good at casting vision, it's making sure you tell the story well, it's making sure that you share a strong why with people, and you don't just go, we're going this way, but you actually go, hey guys, here's what it could look like if we get this right, and this is how we're going to get there. And I think that's some of our more basic leadership. But the people that I've found can that would maybe push back a bit more on change is often your core team and the people above you. And the reason, like I just said, is experience. And that's not a bad thing. And sometimes that can be helpful because it can keep you accountable from just being too gung-ho. And I would just encourage anybody who's maybe struggling with that, maybe like your pastor isn't super keen on change, or maybe your core team is like asking a lot of questions. That's not always the worst thing. Like sometimes the best thing you can do as a leader and you want to implement change and get people on board is to just think that bad boy through and make sure you've actually answered all the questions, dotted your I's and crossed your T's. Because the questions that a lot of times the people who are really at the core of things are asking are most of the times very good questions. So let's say you want to move your youth ministry from a Friday to a Wednesday night because there's lots of sports on a Friday night. Like, sounds like a good idea, but is it really? You know, what does that mean for the youth leaders? Is that going to cost us more because we're renting a venue or, you know, whatever it is? What does that mean for the production team or the worship team? What does that mean for the kids? Like, are the kids actually going to come? Is it really everybody who plays sports? And these are the questions that people who know what they're doing, who are generally in the core, are going to be asking. And so I think sometimes we can feel frustrated because we feel like no one's on board, but it's actually just because people love you and they love your ministry and they want you to win. And I think I often say to maybe someone who's like maybe that I'm leading in a ministry and coaching, or a friend who's maybe called for advice, I've often said if they're trying to make a big change, just sit down for like an hour or two, write down all your thoughts, try and be critical about it, and make sure that you've actually thought this thing through and that it really is the best. Because if it's the best move, you've thought it through, you're confident, you can go and you can get those guys around in a circle and say, hey guys, I really want to make this change. I need your buy-in. Here's some thoughts, shoot any questions. And who knows, maybe they got some really good points. And it's just a matter of saying, great point. Let me think about it this week and get back to you, and just being patient with that. So that's kind of what I've experienced in my journey. And I think maybe that'll be helpful for people, hopefully.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really good. I think there's a lot to be said about just putting in, like, I don't know if this is politicians or whether this is like modern day society, but we're so good at just like coming up with the idea and not having anything to prove it, nothing to back it up, no evidence, no plan. It's just like, this sounds good, let me pitch it, and everyone's going to say, yeah, that sounds really good, but there's no thought about how we're going to get there. And I think, like you said, like core team, and even just generally people in the church, with that, we were talking about that suspicion before, they kind of need something more than just this is where we go, this is where we're going. The why helps massively. I think CJ Alvarado says it's what, how, and then now what. So it's kind of like, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, and this is what you need to do to achieve it. And so you've got those things clearly listed. Someone's going to understand and take that away with them. But that's kind of the interior kind of sort of people. Let's look at more exterior. This is kind of our final question. Is in a church, it may be obvious that a ministry isn't functioning very well. Let's use youth or kids as an example. Parents are reluctant to put their child into that ministry because of the flaws they've seen or the failings they've seen. How do you start to shift people's perceptions that there's actually change coming through? There's some new ideas. How do you rebuild trust in, whether it's, you know, people seeing it from the outside, people that are invested in it? How do you start to rebuild trust that actually this is going in the right direction? And although they may not see the end result just yet, they should come on board on the journey.
Yeah, I think that's underrated, because sometimes as church staff, we can think that the church logo is what pays our salary. But actually the people who are paying our salary are the people that are sitting on the chairs on a Sunday. Like, that's not the spirit of being on church staff, of course. We don't see it like that and think about it like that. But if you have to step back, our stakeholders, you know, the people that really are paying the bills, keeping the lights on, those are the guys sitting in the chairs. And so it does matter to build confidence with our congregation. It does matter to build a sense of excitement, even if it's just amongst the parents in the kids' church, or even if it's just amongst the people in the church, because the reality is you can't build things alone. You need a team. But also, if no one in the church believes in what you're building, they're not going to send anyone your way, just like what you said. And so I think firstly, it's just valuing that the congregation has something to say and that they're not just blindly kind of coming into services. They do notice those things. And it's important that they have confidence in a team. And the one of the big reasons is because, let's say, for example, the youth ministry or the worship team is struggling and it's not healthy. People do talk. You know, the musicians are going to start saying, oh, like, I'm not really enjoying serving on worship. It's struggling a little bit. I don't know. And they're going to start talking. And then guess who they talk to? Their friends in the congregation. And then all of a sudden, everyone in church knows that the worship team's not that great. So that dude who has the gift of playing the keys or whatever, he's not going to really sign up to serve on the worship team because he's heard that it's not great. And so it is really important that that you build a good reputation and you build confidence. But where does it start? I would say that people can only be confident in a ministry if they're confident in a leader. And they can only be confident in a leader if that leader is actually genuinely confident in themselves. And I found that confidence is often one of those things that throws a ministry off, is when a leader has lost their confidence. And often it's like a vicious cycle of losing confidence. They've done a bit of a bad job for a small season, you know, because it happens. Sometimes we miss the mark, we fumble the ball. And then their team has gotten a little bit frustrated and the congregation's kind of understood that, oh, things aren't right here. And then that's affecting their confidence because they know that everyone knows that they're struggling. I think one of the first things to do, if you're the leader that's busy struggling with a youth ministry or worship team, whatever it is you got to get your confidence back. And if it's you and you're the actual person in the driving seat, I would just say that, man, like whatever you got to do, if you've got to get some counseling, if you've got to get some mentoring, if you've got to, speak to your lead pastors or just get some people around you that are encouraging and affirming, like do whatever you got to do to get your confidence back, because it's so important that as a leader, we're confident and we can lead things confidently, because that will build confidence in a congregation. And then secondly, if you're leading people who are not confident, that can be teams, staff, whatever, and they've lost their confidence a little bit, I would just recommend that you give them some challenging but attainable wins. Sometimes a small win can go a long way. And if you can keep some consistent wins, that'll build a bit of confidence in that person, and it's going to build a bit of energy around that ministry. So I think confidence is massive. I think secondly, also just telling your story really well. You know, half the time when a ministry is struggling, if everybody's just hearing, oh, I heard the worship team's a bit, then that's all they're hearing, right? Like, and obviously we would hope that no one speaks like this in church, but we're all humans. Of course, people are speaking like that in church because that's just humanity. But if that's the only thing that people are hearing or talking about, and you're not sharing your story as a ministry or a church area or whatever it is, well, then there's not going to be a lot of confidence built, and you're going to be stuck in that cycle. And sometimes it's as easy as making sure that every opportunity you have, you're sharing a praise report, that you're looking for those stories of God moving. You know, God healed a kid in our youth ministry, or wow, this new kid in the kids' church got saved, or hey, we got 5 new leaders, or we made this change and it really worked, or whatever it is. I think just telling that story well, as far as wide as possible. And that's where leveraging actually your creative teams and your comms departments in church is really helpful. Because to me, a comms department is the storytelling department. They're the department that tells the story of our church. And you can throw your story of your ministry into that mix. And so maybe it's just grabbing your comms manager or leader, social media manager, and for a coffee and just saying, hey, can you help me tell this story really well? I need to build a little bit of confidence back into my ministry. Can you share a couple more photos, a couple more testimonies? I'm sure they'd love to do that, because that's really the calling of someone in that type of ministry, is to tell stories. And so I would encourage you to build confidence and tell your story well.
That's great. I think there's a really important balance to be struck And I think this is why being a leader can be so hard at times, because you have to have the humility to admit that you're wrong, the humility to accept that there's a better version of you and a better version of your team, no matter how far you've gone, but also the confidence to trust that you have what it takes inside you and through the calling that you have to build something, and in the team to have confidence in you as well. So there's this constant balance at play of you need to be humble enough to accept that you're flawed and confident enough to accept that you're strong enough to do this. And I think that's obviously, if we're trying to do that on our own, that's where we fall short. And then we bring God into the situation, and the Holy Spirit, he helps us to be humble and he helps us to be confident. And I think that's, we talked about this with Pastor Mariah in a previous episode about youth ministry, and she talks about the Holy Spirit's importance in your leading. And I think that can never be underestimated in how we go about fixing these things as well. So no, these are great points, AD. And I would love to keep talking about it, but we're at time now. For you, maybe just a final thought, even a hot take on fixing broken ministries, or as we've kind of established, repairing struggling ministries. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say that everything rises and falls on leadership. And it's an age-old saying, but I think that the basics, if you stick to them, are true. And if you are a pastor and you don't know what to do with your youth ministry or your worship team or whatever it is, if you are a leader and you don't know what to do with the ministry that you're leading and you're feeling like it's struggling, I would say that there are no ministries that are struggling. They're only ministers and leaders that are struggling. And it's really important that we look after the people that are leading things, and that we help nurse that person back to confidence, back to life, back to vision, before we can expect the ministry to be nursed back to life and health and confidence as well. And so I would just say the hot take of basically there are no bad ministries or broken ministries, only broken leaders. And we get the awesome job as the church to be the hospital for those who are broken, and to be the recovery space for those leaders who've fumbled the ball or gotten lost or taken their eye off the prize. And we get to be those amazing people who can help them get back to health and see them thrive and see their ministry be all that God's called it to be.
It's amazing. Never underestimate the power of pouring into the one person as opposed to pouring into the hundreds. You know, as I think Pastor John Norman said this in a previous episode about being the shepherd, and you know, you have to focus on those ones and pour into those people. And these are great points, AD. For anyone who's kind of wants to know more information, who wants to connect with you, maybe they want to kind of throw some questions at you about one of the ministries that they're struggling with, how can they get in contact with you?
The best way is just to pop me a DM. I mean, you're going to be absolutely overwhelmed at how incredible my Instagram looks with all my random selfies of me and, you know, badly angled fuzzy photos. You know, it might just be careful not to look too much at them in my Instagram, because you might get jealous and the spirit of envy might come upon you. But just pop me a DM. My Instagram is just AD_Reed. And so pop me a DM. Love to chat. It'll be amazing.
Yeah, there's a reason you're not on the communications team.
Yes, there's a big reason.
That's because you're called to a better place.
Put me there.
Well, AD, thank you so much for joining. Thank you as a friend as well for all you're doing for the church as well. And we really appreciate having you on the show. And if you've enjoyed this episode, then leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, leave a like and comment. That helps us just reach more people. And maybe there's a friend that you know is struggling with their ministry, or they've got someone in their church that's the same. Share it with them as well, and hopefully that will help. And we just really appreciate you taking the time to listen. AD, thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you guys soon on another episode of the Church Circle podcast.